When the Titan Protocol is initiated, the world as we know it will be transformed by a force of unimaginable power. Experience the epic scale of our latest sci-fi drama, where humanity meets its greatest challenge. Click subscribe now and be there for the activation of the future.
My husband's family announced his promotion at Thanksgiving dinner the same night they handed me a manila envelope across the table and told me I had been let go from the family business. The envelope smelled like printer ink and old money. I remember that detail because I was trying very hard not to cry, and I needed something to focus on that wasn't my mother-in-law's face. That was 4 years ago. Last month, Forbes put my name on their 30 under 35 list for fintech innovation. My mother-in-law saw it in the waiting room of her dentist's office. I want to tell you how that happened. My name is Serena Holt. I was 28 when this started, working as a senior financial analyst at a private wealth management firm, a firm that my ex-husband's father, a man I will only call my father-in-law, had co-founded in 1987. I had gotten the job on my own. I need you to know that. I applied through the normal process, interviewed 3 times, passed the compliance screening, and started on a Monday in February with a coffee I bought myself from the Starbucks downstairs. My father-in-law did not know I existed until after I had already been promoted once, but that didn't matter to him, not in the end. My ex-husband. I'll call him my husband for most of this because he was still that for most of the story, was the kind of man who had grown up with the assumption that the world would arrange itself for his comfort. He was not a bad person. I want to be fair. He was just so thoroughly marinated in his family's money and expectation that he had never been asked to want anything for himself. He came to family dinners with opinions already formed by his father. He laughed at his father's jokes a half second before the punchline landed. His sister, who I'll call my sister-in-law, was worse. She had an MBA she never used and a sharp habit of smiling while she said something that was meant to cut. She was the one who, at a dinner about 6 months into my job at the firm, leaned across the cheese board and said, very warmly, "Serena, it's so impressive that you work so hard. Most people with your kind of background would have just found a shortcut by now." I didn't know what she meant by your kind of background. I was from a working-class family in western Pennsylvania. My mother worked the overnight shift at a hospital for 30 years. My father drove for UPS until his back gave out. I put myself through Penn State on scholarships and loans, and one summer working at a call center from 7 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon before my afternoon classes. I smiled at my sister-in-law and said, "I've never really looked for shortcuts." She smiled back. "Of course not. That was how it always went with them." I had been quietly building something on the side for about 2 years by the time that Thanksgiving arrived. I want to explain what it was without making it sound more complicated than it needs to. I had noticed something while working with client portfolios at the firm, a gap, specifically in how middle-income retail investors were being served by automated investing platforms. The robo-advisors that existed were built for people who already had money and already understood how to use them. The onboarding was confusing, the fee structures were opaque, and the educational layer was basically non-existent. I had an idea for something different, a platform that was genuinely built from the ground up for first-generation investors, people like my parents, people who were ready to start but didn't know how and were too proud to ask a banker who would make them feel stupid for asking. I'd been working on it in my apartment, on a second-hand laptop, between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. for the better part of 24 months. I called it Groundwork. My co-founder was a woman I had met at a fintech conference in Chicago. I'll call her my partner, and she was the kind of programmer who could turn an architecture sketch on a coffee shop napkin into working code by the following afternoon. We didn't have an office. We had a shared Google Drive and a standing call every Sunday evening. I made the mistake of telling my husband about Groundwork that October. We were driving home from his parents' house after a Sunday dinner, and I was tired of holding it, and I said, "I've been working on something, a startup. I think it might actually be real." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How long has this been going on?" "About 2 years," I said. The silence that followed was different from his first silence. This one had a shape to it. "You've been working on a competing financial product," he said, while employed at my father's firm. "It's not a competing product. It serves a completely different Serena." He said my name the way you set a plate down when you're trying not to break it. My father cannot know about this. I told him it wasn't a conflict of interest. I showed him the legal opinion I had quietly gotten from an outside counsel months earlier. He looked at it for maybe 4 seconds. This isn't about legal, he said. This is about what it looks like. I should have understood then what was coming. I think I did understand. I just wasn't ready to accept it. 3 weeks later, Thanksgiving. The dinner table at my in-laws' house seated 14. There was a fireplace and a piano, nobody played, and a painting of a duck that had always made me feel watched. My mother-in-law was at one end, my father-in-law at the other, and the rest of us arranged between them in a specific order. I had learned over years to understand as a kind of hierarchy. I sat next to my husband. I had brought a sweet potato dish nobody ate. My father-in-law gave a toast partway through the meal about my husband's recent promotion to managing director. The table applauded. My husband stood up slightly and tipped his glass and said something modest. His father looked at him the way you look at something you built. Then my father-in-law looked at me. "Serena," he said, in a tone that sounded like the beginning of a compliment, "I understand you've been doing some moonlighting." The table went quiet in the particular way that happens when everyone already knows something you don't. "I've been working on a personal project," I said. "It's separate from, we've reviewed the situation," he said. He didn't explain who we was. "There's a potential conflict of interest that we're not comfortable with. We've asked HR to process the separation paperwork." He nodded toward my sister-in-law, who reached under her chair. Under her chair, like she had been holding it there through the whole meal, through the toast, through the turkey, and set the manila envelope on the table in front of me. I looked at my husband. He was looking at his plate. "This is happening right now," I said. It wasn't really a question. "It seemed better than making it a work thing," my father-in-law said, like he was doing me a kindness. My sister-in-law said, very gently, "We just think you'd be happier somewhere that's a better fit for your background." There it was again. That word. I picked up the envelope. I said, "Okay." I did not cry. I did not excuse myself. I finished what was on my plate, and I waited for the dessert to be served, and I ate a piece of my mother-in-law's pecan pie, and I told her it was delicious because it was. My husband and I drove home in silence. 36 hours later, I called my partner from the parking lot of the unemployment office and said, "I'm all in. Whatever we need to do, I'm all in." I could hear her smiling through the phone. She said, "I've been waiting for this call." Here's what being all in actually looked like. I moved out of the house my husband and I shared in Bethesda and into a one-bedroom apartment in Silver Spring, with a radiator that made a sound like something dying every time the heat kicked on. I put $8,000, the last of my personal savings, the part that wasn't tied to joint accounts, into a business checking account. My partner flew from Austin to DC for a week, and we worked at my kitchen table for 14 hours a day, and she slept on an air mattress in my living room. I bought groceries from the discount rack, and I did not go out for coffee once in 6 weeks. I tracked every dollar in a notebook because it felt important to see where it was going, to feel the weight of it physically rather than just watching a number on a screen. My husband filed for divorce in January. I found out via a text from his lawyer because my husband did not call me. I sat with that text for maybe 20 minutes, and then I texted back with my attorney's contact information, and then I went back to work. I want to be honest about that period. It was not glamorous, and it was not cinematic. I was scared most of the time. Not afraid of failure, scared, something quieter and more constant than that. Afraid that I had overestimated myself. Afraid that my father-in-law was right. Not about the conflict of interest, but about the underlying thing he had been implying for years, that I was out of my depth. That I had gotten further than I was supposed to get. That the right ending to my story was a graceful retreat. I didn't let myself say that out loud. But I felt it at 2 a.m. when the code wasn't working and the radiator was screaming and I had $42 left in my personal checking account. What kept me going was actually something small. I had a voice memo on my phone that I had recorded in the parking lot of my in-laws' house after that Thanksgiving dinner before I'd even started the car. I don't know why I recorded it. I think I needed to say it somewhere that wasn't inside my own head. I said, "They think this is over. It's not over. I'm going to build something real." It's not a very inspiring speech. but I listened to it a lot that winter. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Groundwork secured its first round of outside funding. A seed round, $450,000 from a venture firm based in Nashville that had been tracking us through a fintech forum where my partner had posted our beta results. I remember the wire hitting our account at 2:17 in the afternoon on a Tuesday and sitting very still at my kitchen table and not quite knowing what to do with my hands. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. I told her we had just closed funding for the company. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, "How much?" I told her. She said, "Serena, oh honey." And then she started crying, which made me start crying, and we stayed on the phone like that for a while, not saying much. I did not call my father-in-law. I did not call my ex-husband. I thought about it. I thought about it more than I would like to admit. I told myself, not yet, let it grow. Here is a thing that happens when you secure seed funding for a company that sits inside a space that used to employ you. The people who fired you find out. Word travels fast in fintech. I knew this. I had planned for it. My father-in-law called my cell phone 6 weeks after the funding closed. I let it go to voicemail. His message was brisk and professional, like he was calling about an invoice, and he said he had heard about my recent fundraising and he would be happy to discuss any compliance concerns I might have had about my departure and that I should feel free to call him back. I texted my attorney and forwarded the voicemail. My attorney said the message had no legal teeth. I did not call back. 2 things happened in the following year. The first was that Groundwork grew. Not explosively, steadily, in the way that real things grow, which is slow enough that you don't always notice it while you're inside it. We brought on our first 3 full-time employees. We got featured in a fintech newsletter that had about 60,000 subscribers. We started getting inbound interest from users who had found us through word of mouth, which is the metric that actually tells you whether the thing you built works. Our average user was 31. Had a household income under $60,000, and had never had a brokerage account before. That was exactly who we had built it for. The second thing that happened was that my father-in-law's firm had a bad year. I learned this not from anyone in the family. I had cut off contact with all of them, including my ex-husband the moment the divorce was finalized, but through public filings and 2 separate industry sources who reached out to me independently. Apparently because they had connected my name to Groundwork and wanted to understand the competitive landscape. The firm had made several poor, concentrated bets on commercial real estate in the prior 2 years and was quietly managing the fallout. One source told me, with what I can only describe as apologetic glee, that my father-in-law had been heard referring to fintech platforms as flash-in-the-pan nonsense at an industry dinner as recently as 6 months ago. I noted this. I moved on. I did not gloat, at least not out loud. 18 months after the seed round, we closed a Series A, $7 million, led by a firm in Atlanta that specialized in financial inclusion technology. The lead partner on the deal was a woman who had started her career as a bank teller. She understood what we were building in a way that didn't require any explanation. At the closing dinner, she said to me, "This is the company I wish had existed when my parents were trying to figure out what to do with their money." I had to excuse myself for a minute after she said that. The Series A changed things practically. We hired. We moved into actual office space, a real office in D.C., in a building in Noma with actual walls and a conference room and a coffee machine that worked. We upgraded the platform. We started running pilot programs with 2 credit unions in Virginia and 1 community development financial institution in Ohio. The results from those pilots were the kind of results you don't entirely believe until you've triple-checked them. Retention rates significantly above industry average account funding above projections, and user satisfaction scores that our investors kept sending around to each other over email like they were showing each other pictures of their kids. I was 32 by then. I looked about 45. I slept well, mostly, but I developed a habit of waking up at 4 a.m. for no reason and just lying there cataloging everything that could still go wrong. I kept the voice memo on my phone. I still listen to it sometimes. My mother visited the office that spring. She walked through the whole space very carefully, looking at everything, touching nothing except the back of one of the desk chairs. At the end, she said, "Your father would have loved this." My father had died 3 years before any of this happened. I said, "I know." We stood there together in the middle of the office for a minute. The Forbes thing came about because one of the journalists who covered the Series A wrote a longer follow-up piece about Groundwork's impact data, and that piece got circulated inside Forbes, and someone there reached out about the 30 under 35 list. I didn't think much of it. I answered the questions they sent over, and I sent the photo they asked for, and I mostly forgot about it. The issue hit stands on a Thursday in October. I was in a meeting when my partner texted me a photo of the page. I read it twice. My name looked strange in print, in a magazine I'd read in doctor's offices my entire life. I posted a single line on LinkedIn, "Grateful doesn't begin to cover it." I tagged my partner and our team. I did not tag anyone from my former life. My ex-husband texted me that evening. The message said, "Saw the Forbes thing. Congratulations, you always worked hard." I read it 4 times trying to understand what I was supposed to feel. I think what I felt was tired. I wrote back, "Thank you," because that was true and small enough to be safe, and then I put my phone face down and made dinner. My mother-in-law, my ex-mother-in-law, sent me a handwritten note 3 weeks later. I don't know how she got my new address. The note said that she had always admired my determination and that she hoped I was happy and that she was proud of what I had accomplished. The handwriting was very neat. I sat with the note for a long time. I don't know whether she meant it. I suspect she meant some of it or meant to mean all of it, which is its own complicated thing. I put it in a drawer. My father-in-law did not contact me, but I heard through a contact that he had read the Forbes article. I heard that he had been quiet for most of that day. I have thought about what I wanted from all of this, and I think the honest answer is, I wanted to prove that the envelope across the Thanksgiving table was a mistake. Not that he was a bad person, not that his family was evil, not even that I was right and he was wrong about everything. Just that specific thing. That firing me the way they did on that night in that room was the wrong call. Whatever they thought I was, limited, temporary, someone who could be managed and dismissed and sent back to her background, that assessment was wrong. Forbes said so. The users who funded their first retirement accounts through Groundwork said so. The Series A numbers said so. The pilot results from Ohio said so. The most important thing, though, was something that happened about a month after the Forbes piece. I was in our office early on a Wednesday morning before anyone else had come in, going through emails. One of them was from a woman named Angie in Memphis, Tennessee. She had found Groundwork through a post in a Facebook group for people trying to get their finances together after divorce. She wrote to tell me that she had opened her first investment account at the age of 53 and that she had not thought it was possible for someone like her to do something like that, and that our platform had made it feel possible. She said, "I just wanted you to know that this thing you built is real. Thank you for building it." I sat with that email for a long time. That was the moment I understood what the Thanksgiving dinner had actually given me. Not a villain to defeat, not a wrong to right. It gave me the one thing that turns a vague idea into a real company, the complete, absolute removal of every other option. When the envelope came across that table, the door behind me closed. All I had left was forward. I'm not grateful for how they did it. I'm not going to perform gratitude for cruelty. But I am clear-eyed enough 4 years later to understand that the cruelty did its job, the job I needed done. It lit the match. Groundwork now serves over 240,000 users across 41 states. We are currently in the process of a Series B, which I am not at liberty to discuss in detail, except to say that the number is significant and that none of the firms involved have ever heard of my father-in-law. I still have the manila envelope. It's in a file box in my office closet behind a stack of our old pitch decks. I don't take it out often, but every once in a while when something is hard and I need to remember what I'm capable of, I take it out and I hold it for a minute. It still smells like printer ink. It no longer smells like old money. It smells like mine. I've thought a lot about what my father-in-law actually set in motion that Thanksgiving. Not what he intended. I don't think he intended anything beyond protecting what he had built and keeping me at a manageable distance, but what he actually caused, because those are two very different things. There's something that happens when a person uses their power to close a door on you. If you let it, the closing breaks you. But if you don't let it, if you take the humiliation and turn it over in your hands until you understand exactly what it is, which is just information, just data, just one person's decision about your worth that you are not obligated to agree with, then the closed door stops being a wall. It becomes the thing that showed you where the window was. My father-in-law was not wrong about everything. He was right that I was building something that would eventually compete with what he had. He just drew the wrong conclusion. He thought that meant he should stop me. What it actually meant was that I was already ahead of where he thought I was. That's the part I keep coming back to. The cruelty wasn't random, it was specific. It was aimed at the exact thing that was real about me, and it missed. Not because I was lucky, but because the only thing that truly ends a person's potential is if they accept the verdict. I didn't accept it. I drove home with a manila envelope in my bag, and I sat in a parking lot and I recorded a voice memo and I said, "This is not over." And it wasn't. What Angie's email taught me, the woman in Memphis who opened her first investment account at 53, is that the real measure of what I built isn't in the Forbes page or the Series A number. It's in the gap that got closed between a woman who thought investing was for other people and a woman who now has a retirement account. That gap is where Groundwork actually lives. My father-in-law was so focused on defending what already existed that he couldn't see what didn't exist yet and needed to. That's what I'd say if I could go back and talk to myself in that parking lot. Not, "It'll be okay." I hate that. It means nothing when you're scared. I'd say, the intelligence you've been developing your whole life, the discipline you built working overnight shifts and early morning classes, the integrity that made you get a legal opinion before you even told your husband about the company, none of that disappears because someone with more power than you made a unilateral decision about your value. Those things are yours. They go with you. They compound. The world runs on the assumption that the people at the top of a room get to decide who belongs there. Sometimes that's true. But sometimes, when the person at the bottom of that hierarchy has spent 10 years getting sharper and more honest and more clear-eyed while the people at the top were just getting more comfortable, sometimes the assumption is simply wrong. And the only way to prove it is to leave the room and build a better one. I don't carry anger about Thanksgiving anymore. I carry the envelope. That's enough.